their particular journey through production and implementation of video-based learning in a higher ed education system. So
I'm just going to read off here.
I'll just leave the floor to Roger and Rachel.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for having us. My name's Roger, and this is Rachel.
The two R's, we're very grateful that
Yep.
the stationery has been customised for us.
Thanks for joining us. So in this presentation, we're talking about a project that involved working together, basically, to create a whole bunch of video content for a brand new undergraduate unit in the School of Humanities and Communication Arts at Western Sydney Uni. And the unit was called, or is called, Pitch Podcasting Essentials. And
That isn't me, but there we go.
that's me with one of our experts, and that's the studio that we filmed some content in. So it was a collaboration between me, and I'm an academic, and the university's Rich Media team, which is a team at the university which is led by a digital strategist, which is Rachel, and includes a whole bunch of industry professionals. So it was a collaborative project, which is why we thought it was quite exciting. So we're talking about this case study today to identify some of the challenges facing educators implementing video-based learning and to suggest some learning design principles moving forward. So we noticed a whole bunch of things doing this, and we thought, turn this into a presentation, see what happens. And that's what we're going to talk about today. First, we're going to outline a little bit of a analysis of what the current literature about using video in higher education says. And then we're going to outline the case study, which is the project that we worked on together. We're going to note the reflections that we made during the process of doing this project, and hopefully arrive at some kind of best practice principles, I suppose you could say, at the very end, although they are quite in development. So it's quite, it's pretty much established, really. I did a bit of research, and you know, it's pretty much established that video in university content works, right? Based on, you know, the literature says that students like video, that it's great for instructor presence, that it's great for cognitive presence, and it's good for student engagement. Like, that seems to be pretty much accepted. And aside from Winslet, who's one author I found, who talks about the need for academics to collaborate with professionals on video production because of the demand for quality, and also who identifies a problem of academics rushing into video production without enough consideration of how video will be used, we couldn't find much research that was outlining what we're calling the nitty-gritties of video production for academics and teams. In other words, discussion of the issues that come up and need to be considered in future. Because in our opinion, you know, the majority of the research pretty much talks about, okay, you're going to use video, students love it, choose a kind of video, hit record and get going. And we've noticed throughout the course of doing this project that it was a little bit more complicated than that for us. For example, just last Friday I was in a staff meeting. That's not the staff meeting, but it's the closest thing I could find to a staff meeting. And a colleague said, I've got a guest coming, I need video. You know, it was just a given, I need the video. But, you know, there wasn't really much consideration, I realise now in hindsight, of like, why video, you know, for that particular event? What are you going to do with video? How are you going to use it? What sort of learning objectives is it going to satisfy? And you know, so that's kind of our shtick here, is that we've realised, and maybe a lot of you guys have realised that already, there's a lot more to using video than just hitting record. So, having said that, you know, we're hoping to talk about what we haven't found in the literature, and I know that could be because I haven't looked hard enough, but no, it's not. Of course, it's not the reason. But you know, what are those difficult, challenging things involved that we haven't found much written about, okay? And so our research questions were, let's look closer at the nature of the collaboration involved between an academic and a rich media team. What's significant? What comes up that you haven't expected in that relationship? What are some of the learning design principles that emerge from our reflections on the video we created in this particular unit and in terms of the collaborative process? And, you know, what learnings can we apply moving forward? So hopefully this will be helpful.
Okay. So this table really demonstrates the types of video that were produced for this unit. I won't go into too much detail, but there is what we call Western One-Stop, which is a type of recording system that we use to capture a video pod with an academic. We sort of have described that as DIY studio, but it's a very unique process that we use in-house. We also have studio-based video content that's produced, and that's with a full production studio. We have location content that is produced where we actually go to workplaces, or we go to experts, or we shoot on location. And some of that location work is done on campus, some of it's done off campus. So you can see there from the table, we had 29 videos produced for this particular unit, and they were produced fairly quickly over maybe a couple of months.
Yeah, including the planning phase of probably about 6 months.
Yeah. So the videos were collaboratively made, and as I said, they were created in different ways, and they were edited by the Rich Media team. Okay.
So these are the I guess, the sort of key areas that we've noticed in reflecting back on the process of creating videos through a collaborative process for a brand new unit. And one thing that I've realised looking back on the process was how limited the scoping was at the beginning of the project about what kind of video we should use. And that was something that I wouldn't say blame, but that was something that I have realised I needed to do more of moving forward. And despite the lead time, I think I thought I knew what kind of video I needed without thinking enough about the different kinds of video and the different uses. Another thing I've realised looking back on the collaborative process is how the hierarchy, or the team hierarchy between the Rich Media team and myself was a little bit undefined. And I think this sounds great and egalitarian, and it was in many ways, but I realised that it was actually quite complicated, and moving forward a little bit more clearly defined structure would work. And I think that the issues around the difficulties of collaborating were to do with the fact that, who's the lead? I mean, typically the academic is the content expert, but in this case, the technology was new, so the tech was the lead, I was the lead, and trying to find out the best way to manage those two relationships was quite tricky. Not problematic, but just tricky. Another issue that I've realised looking back at the process is how important antecedent factors are on the use of video in higher education. And by that, what I mean is this project was motivated. The university had a mission for us to include industry experts and industry partnerships in our unit production. So there was a very big push for me to include as much industry partnership as I could, experts from the field, and that was pretty complicated. And I pretty much decided moving forward that the easiest and most time-efficient way to do that was to have interviews with industry experts, and I'm not sure that's ideal moving forward. Is that the bottom of that? Yep. Another issue that I've realised moving forward, that we've realised moving forward, which is a big one for me, is that on several occasions embarking on this project, I realised that I needed to hastily develop skills that I didn't have. So going into this project of I'm going to make 29 videos, we're going to collaborate, all of a sudden I realised all the things I couldn't do that I don't usually do as an academic. For example, interview research. Researching to interview someone is quite specific. How much, how little, how much do I need to know? Some people say you need to know more than the talent. Some people say you don't. This was all new for me, and it was all quite challenging. Interview time management skills. How do you manage the time when you're interviewing someone, when you've got 6 interviews in one day? How do you keep that going? How do you keep that on track? Brand new for an academic. Storytelling skills were a huge thing that I realised in hindsight. I was faced with 10 minutes of content, 10 pages of transcripts, and I had to somehow look through those transcripts and work out the best way to organise that information so that a student can watch it and find it, engaging. And that was quite challenging. So despite my experience, in some areas of education and film theory and video and documentary, I was really faced with a number of challenges that I just completely didn't anticipate. A final point about looking back on the skill sets required is that I also realised that not only are interview skills and time management skills and editing skills and storytelling skills necessary for an academic to embark on a big video project, I think marketing skills are quite important too. And by marketing skills, I mean the fact that students these days are watching these videos, just like they watch videos on the internet, right? Just like they watch marketing videos, just like they watch YouTube. And having said that, the videos need to be structured a certain way to grab their attention, to not make them bored, to keep them going, etc., etc. And, a lot of those are marketing skills, which I think are part of the issue here as well. Finally, having had a whole bunch of videos made and worked through a lot of these issues, and I'm not complaining, it was a challenge, but it was a very, very interesting process. I wasn't sure quite what to do with them in Blackboard. I wasn't quite sure of the best way to scaffold this content. Do you put it all at the beginning? Do you put it at the end? How do you get people to read it? Do you put teaser text? Do you put questions afterwards? And I'm thinking now in hindsight, a little bit more input into the scaffolding of that content on Blackboard would have been very useful as well.
So I think the things that Roger's outlined here are really, really common in my connection with academics. So coming from an academic background myself and then managing the Rich Media crew, these are really common issues that we have to work through. And the first time an academic works with the Rich Media team or with video production, these are not uncommon issues that we have to sort out. And I think that an academic is very used to being the lead, but when it comes to actual production, it's a different relationship, and it's not that our team necessarily has to be the lead, but it has to be a negotiated teamwork that has to come together to produce the content. So we've put up here why video, because this is very common. Why do we want a video, and why will video be the best option? So people often start a project, they're in a bit of a rush, like Roger was a little bit, and people say, let's do a video. Should it be entertaining? Should it not be entertaining? No, it's got some serious academic content. We don't care whether it's entertaining or not. This is what we want. We might have a special expert. We might have an industry person. We might want to have credibility. We might want to bring something into the class that can't be replicated by having a text-based explanation. So sometimes first-person things are very interesting and effective. Sometimes it can be really useful to have completely contradictory opinion that can be recorded and captured in video. So careful selection of what and why video is going to be useful needs to be the first step. And to create a really impactful video, it needs to be designed in context with the pedagogy of how the unit is going to be rolled out. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later, but it can be useful, it can be effective, but it has to be balanced with the time that it'll take to produce it and the need for it to be able to be used more than once.
And I think another kind of principle turning the experience into, what to do moving forward, something that I've realised is the limitations of a flat collaborative structure, and the importance of having clearly defined roles. And I think this is especially the case, as I mentioned, with collaborations involving technology, since, the project lead can be unclear in this case. Is it the content or is it the tech? Because both can be new. And something that's kind of come out of this as well, I think, is the merit of a design thinking approach to this kind of collaboration. So design thinking aims to, optimize solutions in an iterative approach. So, problem comes up, get together, solve the problem, move forward iteratively. And I think this approach to a collaboration of this nature, where there's new tech and there's an academic involved, would be very useful, and it might iron out some of those issues I identified with in terms of different skill sets required at each stage of the approach. And given the complexities involved at the various stages of the development of a project like this, I think branching out and looking for multiple skill sets would be useful as well. And I think that can be addressed in the design thinking process too. And I'm referring specifically to the marketing skills, which I think are crucial in the production of video content for students at university.
And I think that we recognised, perhaps even in this project, that the learning science elements weren't really being considered, and putting video and just plonking it in the LMS system at appropriate spots isn't really the ideal way to do it, but that is quite common.
Absolutely, yeah. Moving forward as well, I think clearly defined process documents are really, really important and would be very useful for a collaboration like this. And I know that you've been working on some of those documents.
So we've in our team, we're quite new as a group, and so over the past 18 months we've been working on defining the scope a lot better, and we think that in terms of time management, 60% of our time as a team, and often there's only one person working with an academic, but 60% of that time needs to be on the pre-production, which we consider the scope, the research, the content, the learning outcomes, whether it's going to be a deductive or inductive argument that you're going to present through video, scripting, looking at how it's going to be used. Potentially video is very effective in assessment or a stimulus. So the scheduling, the permissions, the access, the content, the genre, the register of the language that's being used, and the questions, that takes about 60% of the time of one of our team working with an academic. 20% is actually the production, or even less than that, the actual filming, and then 20% or less can be in post-production. So the idea that video is just something that you set up and you push record is a complete, of course, fallacy, and usually produces very, very poor, not targeted content.
Return on investment is a fairly obvious consideration, but it wasn't so obvious for us or for me at the time. You know, like if you're putting a massive amount of money and time and resources into something that's not going to be viewed in 2 years' time, then that needs to be considered as well. So, you know, that whole idea from marketing as well of evergreen content, I think is very applicable to the use of video in higher education as well.
And if it is going to date, then how are we going to actually design for that? Are we going to be able to use the content as a historical context, particularly when you're talking about things that might change politically or legally? It can still be useful, but you need to have anticipated that in years to come you're going to use that particular interview in a different way to what you're using it in the current form.
Stakeholder management is something for me as well. What do other people expect you to achieve with the video that you're using, especially if there's a budget involved, and how's that impacting on your video choice is something that I highly recommend is considered. So in terms of our conclusions, you know, we've pretty much covered a lot of it, but I suppose the first and foremost is that video is more complex than is thought and requires a lot more than simply choosing a kind of video and hitting record.
Yes, that video isn't just one type of video. There are many different types. We're looking at audio and podcasting as well, but you need to really think through how you want students to engage, how you anticipate they're going to actually use and access the content, on what type of platform, where, and I could go on about that forever, but do you want the interview to be a stimulus, or do you want it to actually have content that you're going to discuss in other parts of the course? Do you want Q&As? Do you want a different style? There are many, many style, content, pedagogy choices that need to be explored, and then they need to be analysed afterwards.
Return on investment, as we mentioned, and for me, you know, the last thing that I'll mention I'm quite interested in is how do you measure the success of your video? And I don't think, you know, success is necessarily measured through student hits or views. I think there's a more complex way that I would like to see, you know, some research on the most effective way to measure student engagement with video, because, you know, part of me doesn't believe, or part of me believes that students don't quite know how to absorb information from video, because I think they watch it in the same way as they watch Netflix. And I've watched students in my classrooms when you ask them to watch a video, and they watch it as if it's a Netflix show. You know, they sit down, they don't take notes, they fold their arms, and they're just like, all right, let's watch this. And so I think, you know, how do you measure the effectiveness of video is actually a much more complicated question than you would think immediately.
So there we have it, a quick summary and some reflections on the use of video in content production.
Thanks.
Thank you. That was easy.
Well, I actually have one question. The reason why I ask is because in my past life, I was also an academic that dabbled in video as well. And in my journey of that, I think I resonate with a lot of what you both have said. Now, if there was another academic that was going to walk through the same journey and wanting to do the same thing, what would be the most important 3 tips that you might want to provide them for them to think about before really stepping into that journey?
I think audience. I think, you know, a key part of production content is audience. What do you want your audience, as in your student, what do you want them to actually, how do you want them to engage with you? How do you want them to view the content? So do you want it to be stimulating? Do you want it to be credentialing? Do you need it as an information transfer? Do you think about what you actually want the student to gain from the experience of watching video? Because that will determine the type of genre that you will choose. And so that's my first tip, is what is the actual need and why video? Why does it have to be video? And usually people aren't really clear on that. It's something they think that is going to be handy or trendy or useful, but they don't really think why.
I think my number 1 tip is consider the return you're going to get from it and how much you need to put into it. Because I've been quite frustrated in the past, having spent a lot of time setting up an interview with somebody and going on location and bringing a crew and getting stressed out of my brain about, you know, researching it and whether I look like a fool interviewing, you know, someone from the ABC, and then feeling like and that's why I'm frustrated about measuring the effectiveness, feeling like it's not really used by the students. I mean, I can see it's not watched as much as I would like, and I'd like to know what they got out of it, but I'm just not convinced that the return was worth it. And I wonder if another format could have given me the same return with much less investment, and not at the expense of the student's experience. But I think that question is a big one for me. How much to put in and being clear about what the students are going to get out of it. You know, if you have the golden formula for that, I'd love to know what it is.
And that is about the design of what the video being captured is going to be used and how it's going to be used in the classroom. So if you don't go to record it with that view, with that understanding, then you're going to get this interview that's not going to necessarily do well to be interrogated by students, or that you're not going to design enough learning outcomes to make use of the resource.
I just want to ask, what technology do you use to video? Can you hear me?
Yes, yeah.
Like, for instance, we use MediaSite.
Mm-hmm.
And in MediaSite, you have the ability to, when a student is watching the video, they have the ability to ask questions at certain points in time.
That would be good. No, we don't. No, we don't use that, and that would be great.
And the analytics is built in. You can see
exactly
how long they've watched it, when they got bored and turned it off.
No. So potentially, but at the moment we don't have. We have some analytics, but we don't have a lot, and we don't have. Unfortunately, we don't have the key part that is in MediaSite where you can annotate, can't you? Yes. So that's really important, I think, because that draws people to the key points that you want to make, and then gets the response.
Presented inside your Blackboard course.
So either through a Panopto link, so we're using Panopto, or through an unlisted YouTube link.
So it takes them outside the Blackboard.
No, they can watch it within the. Yeah.
We have a small video team as well, and it's gaining more and more requests. And I was wondering how you prioritise those requests. Do you have criteria that would place this request above that request?
Yes. So sorry, which uni?
We're at Southern Cross Uni.
Southern Cross. Okay, so we have very complex priorities that are based on load and how many hours of our time can be given to each school. And then the school works with us to prioritise what is important, because we could have, you know, literally 20 times more requests than we could come close to delivering.
And I think those requests go back to the point we were making about academics, the default being that we need video. So making lots of requests and then, you know, feeling frustrated that their requests aren't being met because of the, you know, it's a workload issue, but they don't even maybe need video in the first place, is an important point as well.
Well, it also, I know with my team, they get really frustrated if they're asked to produce talking head video after talking head video after talking head video, when they think people could sit in their office and put a camera at themselves if that's what they want. And they'd like to do more creative type work. So it's a balance between providing what the academics want as against fulfilling the creative, if you like, needs of the team.
Well, we tend to not have that problem as much, but yes, I mean, it's just not all video is the same. Not all video is equal, and there are many different ways to produce it. And I think that in terms of the future of the students that are coming to us that have basically been using video themselves for a very long time and completely interactively, I think we need to change perhaps our even production values, the way that we think of video. We still carry quite a strong television model of video, whereas students coming through to us don't see video in that way at all. So I think that there's lots of things that still need to be explored, and particularly academics who are used to being the sage on the stage, put them into a video context, and the relationship has to change. We're not a corporate video team, so we don't ever present like that, but people come with an expectation that that is what they might get. So there's a lot of management issues that need to be sorted through. Yes.
A couple of questions. My name's Bernard with the University of Newcastle.
I guess.
I work with our VLE, both Blackboard and Panopto. What I found actually really interesting was the question you put up there, why video? I get asked a lot, I want a video for this. What is your expectation? What are you after? So I think that's really important. I'm just wondering, out of this experience you guys have had building this content for this undergrad course, were you able to develop any frameworks or guidelines for other faculties or schools who want to be able to create content, or think, oh, I want to build video, and they go, oh, I can do this and it's going to look like this, but if they're presented with basically a workflow of what's involved, they may go, oh, okay, it's not as easy as sitting in front of a camera and talking to it.
So yes is the answer to that. It's a work in progress at the moment, and we have two quite different workflows. So one workflow is for the recorded pod type content, where it's basically based on lecture and PowerPoint that comes together in our Western One Stop Studio, and then we have a different workflow for the more developed projects, which comes with a set of criteria. Yes, so not quite published yet, but not far away.
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify what I think was already answered as well. The end result of scaffolding these videos in the undergrad course, did you say it was just basically embedded iframes within the course site? Is that how you ended up going?
Yeah, so just embedded iframes within each weekly slab of content, and I guess the point I'm making about is how to, I think there's a certain amount of, learning science involved in how to, when to put it and how to kind of concept check afterwards, or, introduce the video beforehand. But to your point about process documents, I think it's quite complicated because on the one hand, our university is encouraging academics to use a DIY one-stop studio, which kind of sends the message that it is just a case of going into the DIY studio and recording. Yet on the other hand, it's really important that these process documents and this scoping takes place at the beginning. So I think part of that piece is really is educating academics into the complexities of those two choices as well.
And often when I start scoping with an academic, what they think they want and what they actually needed, we both conclude are quite different at the end, as I'm sure you're used to as well. So people don't really know what nor should they. They don't come from a production point of view. But they think that they they think at first they know what they want, and then once we work through what they're actually trying to achieve in their unit, there's actually a huge amount of other options that could be more effective.
I wanted Scorsese. You didn't give it to me.
I didn't give it, sorry.
Anyway, thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I think that wraps up our mid-afternoon session, and afternoon tea just served outside, and the next session will actually start at 20 to 4.